There is a jar of apple butter sitting on grocery store shelves right now, and it costs almost nothing. What I can tell you is that the version we made from scratch, the one stirred over an outdoor fire for the better part of a day, tasted nothing like it. And apple butter was only one of 10 things we never bought. We made our own cooking fat, our own cheese, our own bread, our own pickles, our own butter. Some of what is on this list will surprise you. One item near the end will make you wonder why anyone ever stopped. Stay with me. Number 10, apple butter. We did not buy apple butter. We made it, every autumn, together. In many Pennsylvania Dutch households, making apple butter was not a solo kitchen project. It was a day-long event. Tart apples came in by the crate from the orchard. A copper or iron kettle was set over a wood fire outdoors. The apples went in with cider, sugar, cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and then someone had to stir, slowly, steadily, without stopping, for hours, or the bottom would scorch and the whole batch would taste of it. By late afternoon, the mixture had cooked down to something thick and dark, almost the color of mahogany. The smell filled the yard, sharp apple, warm spice, wood smoke underneath it all. Women and girls took turns with the long wooden paddle. Jars were filled while still hot, lids sealed, and then distributed among the families who had helped. The store version keeps the name, it keeps the color. What it removes is the hours of slow reduction, replacing them with pectin and a shorter cook. The result is sweeter, thinner, and missing the slight bitterness that made the original complex. You can taste the difference the moment you spread it on warm bread. The recipe survived. The afternoon of women and kettles and neighbors mostly did not. Number 9, rendered lard. We did not buy cooking oil. We rendered it from the hog fat we had already paid for in feed and work. Nothing from the butchering was wasted. The fat was cut, put into a large pot over low heat, and rendered slowly until the liquid turned clear and the bits of tissue, the cracklings, floated up golden and crisp. Warm lard poured into a crock was milky white and smelled faintly of pork. Once cooled and set, it became creamy, solid, and shelf-stable in a cold cellar for months. A spoonful went into the skillet every morning. It went into pie dough, biscuits, fried bread. Pastry made with lard shatters differently than pastry made with oil. The crust does not bend, it breaks, clean and flaky. Mid-century health messaging turned lard into something shameful. Industrial vegetable shortening arrived with cleaner packaging and better advertising. And most American kitchens traded one fat for the other without tasting both side by side. The question of which produced better pie crust never fully settled. We did not waste the fat, and we never needed a label to tell us what it was made of. Number 8, scrapple. My mother called it using the whole animal. The butcher shop would call the ingredients scraps. We called it breakfast. Scrapple is most strongly rooted in Pennsylvania Dutch and German-American cooking going back to colonial settlement. After butchering, the remaining pork, head meat, offal, small trimmings, was simmered until tender, removed from the bones, then returned to the broth with cornmeal, salt, pepper, and sage. The mixture was cooked until thick, poured into loaf pans, and set in the cold cellar. That was it. It held for weeks. To eat it, you sliced it cold and dropped it into a hot skillet with a little lard. The outside formed a hard brown crust. The inside stayed dense and steaming. It was savory, slightly grainy, and more filling than it looked. Nobody called it delicate. It was protein for people with work ahead of them. Commercial scrapple still exists in some mid-Atlantic grocery stores. The homemade version used different cuts, different spice combinations, and a coarser texture. It was eaten as a practical food, not a regional curiosity. The store version kept the name. What it left out was everything that made it worth making. When you raised the hog, grew the corn, ground the meal, and tended the fire, every part of the butchering carried a cost you could measure. Throwing out the scraps was not wasteful in the abstract sense. It was throwing out your own work. Number 7, rivels. Rivels are not a recipe most people could read and understand. They are something you watch someone else make until your hands know the motion. The ingredients are almost nothing: flour, egg, a pinch of salt. You rub them together between your palms until they form small, irregular crumbles, somewhere between a pea and a raisin in size. Then you drop them directly into simmering broth or hot milk. They cook in minutes and swell into soft, slightly chewy dumplings that absorb the flavor of whatever surrounds them. In many Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, rivels went into tomato soup made from summer's last tomatoes, or into chicken broth, or into corn soup when the harvest was coming in. A thin pot became a filling meal without adding much cost at all. A skilled cook could make them in under 10 minutes with nothing but a bowl and what was already in the pantry. Soup came from cans. The motion of making rivels was never written down anywhere because it was assumed every woman already knew it. Then one generation forgot the hand motion, and the recipe became a list of ingredients with no instructions anyone could fully follow. No one wrote it down because no one thought it needed writing, and then it was nearly gone. Number 6. Fried cornmeal. Mush people call polenta fashionable now. We called it Tuesday. Cornmeal mush is cooked porridge, water, cornmeal, salt, stirred over heat until thick. In the evening, the leftover mush was poured into a loaf pan and left to set overnight in a cold room or cellar. By morning, it had solidified enough to slice with a knife. Those slices went straight into a hot skillet with lard, where the outside turned golden and crisp before the inside had fully warmed. It sizzled when it hit the pan. The edges browned faster than the center. Eaten with molasses poured over, it tasted almost sweet, almost savory, and it held a person through several hours of cold morning farm work without fuss. A bowl of cold cereal from a box might carry someone through a commute. It would not carry someone through 3 hours of milking, hauling, and feeding before the sun was fully up. The food had to match the work. Fried mush matched it. Packaged breakfast cereals arrived, and cornmeal became associated with older, poorer households. The two-step process felt inefficient when something came ready in a box. The restaurant charges $12 for polenta. We charged nothing because it was already there from the night before. Number 5. Smearcase. When milk began to turn, we did not pour it out. We made smearcase. The word comes from the German smearcase, spreadable cheese. In many Pennsylvania Dutch homes, smearcase was fresh cottage cheese made from whole milk that had begun to sour naturally. The clabbered milk was gently warmed, the curds separated from the whey, and the curds were drained through muslin until they reached whatever texture the cook preferred. Some families ate it loose and creamy. Others pressed it firmer and spread it on bread like a soft cheese. It was mild, slightly tangy, and satisfying in the way that protein-dense food is satisfying. Not flashy, just useful. Some ate it plain, some poured a little cream over it with sugar. Others added chives and salt and ate it at every meal through summer. On a farm with dairy cattle, this cost nothing but time. The milk was already there. It was going to do something whether you guided it or not. Pasteurized milk from a grocery store does not clabber the same way. It spoils rather than souring cleanly, which means the raw milk technique simply does not transfer to a modern kitchen without adjustment. Home dairy cattle disappeared. Cottage cheese became a diet food sold in plastic tubs, uniform and stabilized, and the connection between a souring crock and a jar of cheese on the table was lost in the same generation. The store sells you cottage cheese. We made it from the milk that was already leaving. Number 4. Homemade bread. My mother never measured the flour. She measured by feel. In homes like ours, bread was not a weekend hobby. It was baked several times a week because by Thursday, the last loaf from Monday was gone, and a large family ate bread at every meal. The dough was mixed in an enamel bowl large enough to fit both arms. It rose under a cloth near the stove. The kitchen smelled of yeast from mid-morning onward. You can write down 1 cup of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 packet of yeast, proof for 1 hour. What you cannot write down is when the dough has had enough kneading, when the room is too cold for a proper rise, when the crust sounds hollow and done, or when to trust the oven over the clock. That knowledge lived in hands, not on cards. When the hands stopped making bread daily, the cards became instructions that nobody could quite follow all the way to the end. Commercial sliced bread arrived with longer shelf life, consistent texture, and no labor. Women's time became more visibly valued elsewhere. The knowledge that had moved quietly from mother to daughter through demonstration, not recipe, not measurement, not instruction, but watching and doing and correcting, simply had fewer chances to move. The weekend baker makes bread for pleasure. We made it because by Thursday, the last loaf was gone. Number 3. Molasses. We did not reach for sugar first. We reached for molasses. It was cheaper, it lasted, and it did more. A large tin of molasses sat on kitchen shelves in many older farm households through most of the year. Dark, thick, slightly bitter at the edges with a flavor that corn syrup never came close to matching. It went into baked beans, into choufle pie, into gingerbread, into the skillet with fried mush. But the simplest use was bread. Warm bread with molasses poured or spread over it was a meal for a child before chores, an afternoon snack, a quick breakfast before the men went out to the field. The flavor is not sweet simple. There is depth in it, something almost smoky, something almost sharp. And on warm bread it soaks into the crumb and the whole thing smells faintly of winter baking. White sugar became cheap enough to replace it. Corn syrup replaced it in commercial baking because it behaved more predictably at scale. Molasses became a specialty ingredient kept at the back of the baking shelf, pulled out once a year for a holiday recipe. As an everyday spread, it is nearly gone from American tables. You can still find it on the shelf. You almost never find anyone putting it on their bread at breakfast anymore. Number 2, pickles and preserved vegetables. The cellar shelves in August looked like a library. Every jar was a decision made in June that would feed us in February. Cucumbers, beets, green tomatoes, cabbage, relishes made from mixed garden vegetables. These were the work of July, August, and September. Canning kettles ran for weeks. Women worked together through the hottest days of the year because the alternative was a bare cellar by January. In many Pennsylvania Dutch households, church fellowship meals traditionally included a range of what were called sweets and sours, pickled and preserved relishes set out in small dishes alongside the main food. That tradition demanded a well-stocked cellar, and so the cellar was stocked. Pickled beets stain everything they touch. Chow chow, the mixed relish of green tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, and vinegar, smells sharp and bright when the jar opens. On a cold January evening, opening a jar that had been sealed in August carried summer into a winter kitchen for a moment. Refrigeration made the urgency less immediate. Store-bought pickles filled the shelf cheaply. Canning fell out of practice for a generation after food safety concerns became widespread, and some of those concerns were justified. Modern homes without root cellars had nowhere to put a winter's supply. The jars thinned out and eventually disappeared from most American basements. A jar of store pickles costs almost nothing, but it cannot tell you what the cellar smelled like in January when you carried one up for supper. None of this was done for charm. None of it was done for a weekend project or something to photograph. It was done because the alternative was spending money the household did not have on something the farm could already provide. The habit of making before buying was not old-fashioned. It was the only arithmetic that made sense. Number 1, hand-churned butter. Every kitchen I knew growing up had a churn, not as decoration. We used it. Cream skimmed from the milk of dairy cows, poured into a churn, and worked until the fat separated from the buttermilk. That was all it was. In spring and early summer, when cows were on grass, the butter came out pale yellow, almost orange at its richest. In winter, when the cows were on hay, it ran nearly white. Salt was added by hand. Some families liked it salty enough to keep well through the week. Others left it sweeter and used it faster. Spread on warm bread, fresh butter melts immediately and soaks into the crumb. There is no comparison to the foil-wrapped block from the dairy case. The fresh version has a clean sweetness underneath the fat, a smell that is recognizably milk and cream and nothing else. Children who did the churning as a chore understood exactly what butter was and where it came from, because they had just made it with their own arms. Dairy centralization moved milk to large processing facilities. Butter arrived wrapped, labeled, uniform, and shelf-stable for months. Margarine replaced it in many homes through the middle of the last century. The churn moved to the barn sale and from there to an antique display. The farm that produced the cream was sold or subdivided and the connection was gone. The churn did not fail. The apple butter kettle did not fail. The crock of pickles did not fail. What changed was the morning. When the morning no longer began before sunrise with work that needed fuel, the food that provided it had nowhere left to go. We did not buy butter because we did not need to. The cream was there, the churn was there, the knowledge was there. We simply used them. These were not recipes made for nostalgia or cookbooks. They were the arithmetic of a household that could not afford to throw away what the farm had already produced. A jar of apple butter, a crock of lard, a loaf of bread made before anyone else woke, a churn worked by a child who would grow up knowing exactly what butter was. If your grandmother made something that you can still find in a store but it is not the same, or something you cannot find anywhere at all, I would like to hear about it. Leave it below. Those recipes matter.